improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition for the week of November 7th. And before we begin, I'd just like to say thank you. This has been a lot of work. You guys and gals have stuck with me to get this podcast where it needs to be, and you continue to offer your listening, your attention, and your support. And I just wanted to say thank you. For those that have supported us, there's some wonderful content on its way, as well as some surprises. More on that as we move along. I also wanted to wish the Marine Corps a very happy 250th birthday. Outstanding and Semper Fi. Lastly, to the Marine Reconnaissance Foundation, thank you for your support as well. And I wish you a wonderful Marine Corps ball in just a couple of days. So, moving into the week's stories, a couple of things that have caught my attention that I wanted to discuss. First and foremost is Nigeria. So, a brief history of Nigeria before we talk about the topics. The country was independent in the 1960s, early on. Prior to that, it was a colonial territory, like most of Africa. It went back and forth between the French, the German, and the British. That continent has been colonized by every Western entity that you can think of. And although the United States came a little bit late to the game, we have a footprint there as well, for better or for worse. Fast forward, they had a civil war sometime around the late 60s. The United States remained neutral, but we definitely strongly opposed the human rights violations that were taking place. Finally, the Civil War ends, and we come in the 70s with a tremendous amount of oil exploration. Yeah, I get it. It's very cynical to say that the only place we go is where the oil is, but hold on a minute. This benefits everybody. It helped bring tremendous amounts of money into their economy, and it gave them an export, which they still control. So whether or not it was an American company, a British company, whoever owns the oil manufacturing refineries, it's still under the auspices of Nigeria. So they benefit from it as well. Fast forward to the 80s, we had a little bit of an issue as the military took ownership of the civilian government. And we somewhat in the 80s and 90s suspended and sanctioned our relationship with Nigeria. The general that was in charge at the time wasn't exactly nice. There was a lot of human rights violations. We put in a tremendous amount of aid packages through a variety of NGOs and GOs. That went away once military control was given back to the civilian government. So, basically 1999 to 2010, the United States invests heavily into the country, both in their infrastructure, aid packages, and trade partnerships, but also medical assistance. Africa is known to have a really high HIV rate, and that sort of matriculates down to the rest of the continents on the planet. So, as the saying goes, a rising tide raises all ships. While we don't have any specific skin in the game to help that continent improve, it's kind of the right thing to do. And the U.S. has been doing the right thing, or trying to, for quite a while. Not always successful. We also, as I said, we established a trade framework that brings billions of dollars in revenue to both parties, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 billion, which doesn't sound like a lot when you look at the entire GDP of the United States, but I'll take a percentage of that 15 billion if somebody was offering. So it is mutually beneficial. Now, in 2014, Boko Haram came onto the scene, or at least probably was there much prior to that, but it was a pretty large kidnapping. I think most people remember that. And they were designated as a terrorist organization. So since then, we have had a counterterrorism and security cooperation with that country, helping them train their military. We've supplied them with some military hardware, which the United States does globally. I know I've mentioned this before, but we supply almost 43% of the world's military hardware. Good old US of A. So that's something to consider. We collaborate against Boko Haram with them, and we try to encourage human rights standards. A lot of the free world countries agree to human rights agreements, and the list of trade organizations, treaties, and agreements the United States has signed would fill a phone book. Oh, I'm sorry. Phone books, ladies and gentlemen, were these published books bound that would allow you to turn pages and locate phone numbers of people and businesses. And it's been replaced by your cell phone now, but the point is there's a lot of stuff. So this is not unusual. The United States constantly, consistently helps a lot of countries globally bring themselves up into prosperity, keeps a sharp watch on monkeypox, HIV, other communicable diseases in conjunction with the CDC. And you said we try to, eliminate those for the benefit of everybody. So the biggest thing that has taken place in the past couple of years is that in the neighboring country of Niger, the U.S. had 2 bases. We've lost those bases. The reasons are tangential to the conversation, so we'll leave that one aside. Suffice it to say that we don't have any military basing in the area, and we rely on cooperation from a lot of these countries that we have positive relationships with to do overflights. Looking for, Al-Qaeda in Africa, other terrorist organizations that are in that continent. We fly ISR, and we provide overflight of a lot of countries, and you need their permission. Because they're sovereign airspace, they're sovereign countries, maintaining relations with these countries allows us freedom of movement. And here's a little military strategy 101, right? It's this little thing called defense in depth. You would much prefer to fight your enemy as far away from your home base as humanly possible. And despite what some of you may think, the world is round. So we have to defend from a couple of different directions. And it's in our interests to make certain that military operations in that continent are unrestricted. To do that, we try to play nice with everybody. Doesn't always mean that they're going to play nice with us. So that's kind of where we are, where we were with Nigeria, and why that country is of interest to us. Again, just to recap, trade partner is the big one. We collaborate against Boko Haram, so we have a military cooperation. And there's a humanitarian aspect. So let's fast forward to current. Currently, the Trump administration had said that if the Christians were not stopped being persecuted, that he was going to perform military action, or at least he directed the Department of War to prepare military options to counter the human rights violations that are taking place in Nigeria, specifically against the Christians. And I have to say, not that I have any religious bent here one way or another, it's kind of odd that that's the justification, considering the fact that this military assistance program that we've had with Nigeria has been in place for a long time. Their human rights violations have ebbed and flowed, but we've always been aware of it. I'm not tracking any particular catalyst or event that suddenly triggered this. So did someone petition the administration for assistance? Was there some mass grave that was uncovered that had Christians in it where the United States suddenly recoils in horror? The thing about this is that at any given time, in any given country, there is some counterinsurgency group, some zealous religious organization who's persecuting someone else. Someone's arms are getting hacked off. Someone's food is getting taken. Somebody is forced into indentured servitude. I don't like it. We should stop all of it. Darfur, Timor, the list goes on, but I guess I'm a little confused why now. What happened that suddenly the administration is so hell-bent on what is potentially upsetting a very homeostasis balance between us and that region? I don't know, but there's 3 courses of action that the president can take to counter this human rights violation against the Catholics, and that is, he's already designated them as a country of concern, and that allows the Treasury Department, it allows the U.S. Department of State to enact sanctions if they want to, based off of the administration's insistence, based off of what Nigeria's response to the perceived problem is. Now, Nigeria pushed back and said, I think that you're basing your assumptions on faulty data. There is nothing that is so egregious in our country that you need to designate us as a country of particular concern. But be that as it may, they did. So COA 1 is you can increase the CPC dial. You can turn it up to 11, continuing down or up the ladder, however you want to use this metaphor, towards targeted sanctions, visa bans, and then you may want to consider or realign your security assistance package, foreign military aid, foreign military training, and that is something that is the least escalatory, the easiest to imply, and what will probably yield you the weakest response for your money, the smallest bang for your buck. But as always, all U.S. bases in AFRICOM have increased their force protection posture. It was typical anytime that an intelligence threat is out there, and this is not surprising in any way, shape, or form. By labeling them a CPC, we do risk putting that overflight permission on hold. That country's sovereignty has to be respected. A lot of people would love it if the United States would just strut around the world doing as we please, and in many ways we do. And I'm not arguing the morality of it one way or another, but there's something to be said for that adage, you catch more flies with honey. I think in this case, respecting that country's sovereignty is probably going to yield better results than forcing our way in. And that brings us to COA number 2. So COA number 2 is where we were to work with the country's existing government on targeted strikes against the terrorist organizations, the rebels. I mean, there's a couple of different factions that are knocking around that country, all of which are causing a lot of stabilization problems to the established government and a challenge to the military, which, look, there's no military in the world that is better trained and equipped than the United States. It's just a fact. There are other countries that may be better equipped. There are other countries that may be better trained. But those two things, nobody does it better than the good old US of A. So when you look at a foreign government's military and their ability to maintain order within their own country, it's not going to be with the same fidelity that it is when it's the US. So they need help. They need cooperation. And we give it in spades. We have an entire region dedicated towards Africa and military assistance. So COA number 2 is non-kinetic, providing intelligence, sharing ISR, and ensuring that the threats against Nigeria are adjudicated without violating their sovereignty and without upsetting the trade balance and the cooperation that the two countries have. So that's option number 2. Number 3, the United States could unilaterally strike on our own without the cooperation of the Nigerian government. It means violating their airspace. There's going to be a tremendous amount of backlash. It's going to complicate any further counterterrorism cooperation with this country because Africa is riddled with space. There's a lot of empty ground. There's a lot of places for terrorist organizations that mean us harm to operate with impunity, to train arm, equip, and prepare for whatever comes next. So we have to be in that continent. We have to root out those terrorist organizations. Defense in depth, we would rather fight them on the continent of Africa than have to deal with another attack on domestic soil. With Niger basing gone, staging kinetic operations becomes much more difficult. You are going to need refueling. You're going to need ISR. You're going to have problems with your recovery apparatus. Remember, anytime that aircraft fly, anytime that a human piloted aircraft flies, you have to entertain the possibility that an aircraft is going to go down. So you have to be within range of search and rescue and all of the overflight packages that go with that. If you do a unilateral strike within the country of Nigeria, you risk all of that. You increase our supply chain and you add a lot of complexity to some of these longer range missions. And the other thing that it does is it gives the Nigerian government the opportunity to exploit that for their own gain. They may decide to go towards other countries for military aid. A lot of those other countries are our enemies, and we don't want that. We have made that mistake in a couple of places in the last 15 to 20 years. We have cut our nose off to spite our face. And so my hope is that COA 3 is not undertaken. I don't think that it will. President Trump's rhetoric, it definitely changes the tone. It changes the tone of the conversation. It is probably going to be received in the spirit it was intended, which is tighten your shit up, watch your human rights violations, and if you don't, there's going to be consequences. They do not want to upset the United States, and I don't think we want to break our agreements with them. So my assessment of all of this is probably COA 2, quiet consent-based ISR, and no violation of that country's sovereignty. So in cooperation with their government, we will probably help target some of these insurgents and hopefully appease whatever organization, individual decided to suddenly wake up one day and said, they're killing Christians, it has to stop. I'm not suggesting in any way that anyone should be killed. It's confusing to me. Why now? Why this? Why this demographic? Why this moment in time? In 2025, November, suddenly the targeting of a particular religious group in this country is of concern to the United States. It's interesting to me. But anyways, that is the situation as it stands currently. Over the next week or so, I would imagine that the sanctions that are being put onto the table are going to be voted on in Congress and probably put into place. And we'll see. We'll see what the Nigerian government does in response, whether some of these actions that they are capable of taking are taken. And if not, we will see which COA the Department of War decides to be employing. So, yeah, we'll circle back to this next week, I'm sure.
Yeah, my 2 cents.
Send it.
Expounding on what you were saying pertaining to why now, when genocide has been a part of what's been going on in Africa throughout history.
Yeah.
Look at, Uganda, look at the Congo, look at, the list is a long one that we have basically ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So why now? As an interesting thing, and the only other thing I could add to that is that, how the militants could exploit the U.S. strikes, for propaganda. Pertaining to escalating anything is always the inherent problem, is that you risk, what is at risk when you start to escalate? I do think that, in this situation, that could become extremely problematic for the government of Nigeria. The escalation of how by the U.S. and what that would do to the.
But see, but it's only, but it don't. only if...
Let's start with...
But I don't necessarily agree with the assessment. Well, I do, but not... Let me clarify. Targeting these groups unilaterally risks alienating the Nigerian government, and that alienation can be used as a propaganda tool. If you do it in conjunction with the Nigerian government, then it's a benefit. What you don't want to do is force the Nigerian government to seek military assistance and cooperation from one of our adversaries, which has happened, i.e. China, who is eager to expand military bases globally, or potentially Russia, who always is eager to use its proxy, private military corporations, to exploit resources and treasure from whatever country they are asked to come in and take part in. So my concern is that if the United States operates without the consent of the designated, the duly elected Nigerian government, you're going to give fodder towards anti-government factions and terrorist organizations, and they will use that as a propaganda tool to further justify their actions and recruit more people to their cause. It is a razor's edge that we walk with our foreign policy anytime that we engage in something like this.
Yeah, and you saw it in Iraq, where you had people coming from all sorts of countries that were coming in to fight a fight because they saw it as an opportunity.
Well, Iraq saw it as a holy war. It was, it was their call to arms. It was the great Satan that was coming to. I mean, this was the biblical prophecy. They thought being manifest. People were becoming war tourists from all over the world to fight the American imperialists, which that's fine. I can reload as many times as you keep coming at me.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, at this point in history, I think that is what is happening. Like if the U.S. gets involved, then, look at what ISIS is doing in Africa, as far as recruiting people, and any opportunity they have to engage,
right,
they're going to take it. And
right.
So that's the whole point, bringing the fight, where we come to the fight, all of these other factions come to play.
But I think that if the U.S. provides greater security cooperation to the Nigerians military and focuses our intelligence and reconnaissance infrastructure against some of these targets, I think it's going to yield a lot. But again, I'll circle back to something I said opening, which is why now? Africa as a continent has had a long and storied history of horrible human rights violations. Some of the worst human rights atrocities have been committed in that continent. And not just the United States, but the entire Western world has kind of, at one point or another, said, fuck it, it's not my problem. I can't help wonder what is going on here now that is so egregious it requires the administration to potentially upset this balance with Nigeria that we've had since the 70s. We've got resource agreements, we have oil agreements, there's infrastructure, we do military assistance, we do humanitarian assistance. I'm not saying that you don't push your weight when your weight needs to be pushed, but what exactly are we pushing against here?
Well, I think it comes back to the Trump administration. I think it comes back to, you look at what went on with, I do think that Christians in general are, a large part of the conversation to live. Look at Charlie Kirk, look at the role at Sweet Clavens, you look at Laura Loomer, look at all these people that are close to the administration who are on the far right and are Christians.
Yeah.
And it's a relevant aspect. You look at all of the things that surrounding the project, the Project 2025 thing, and you look at also the rhetoric of Trump. And I do think that this is more of, hey, get your shit together And there's really no intention of going there.
No, I don't think. Well, it's not like you're going to have a lot of boots on the ground. A couple of military advisors. It's mostly intelligence. It's mostly support remotely. It's our satellites and our drones and our reconnaissance apparatus identifying where the threats are and then directly targeting them by proxy with the Nigerian government. I don't think that there's a lot of tax on behalf of the government. There's the United States' blood tax for this. It's pretty low. I mean, we retask a couple satellites. You may have some intelligence officers on the ground running a little more sources, but it's not that painful. I don't mind that we're doing it. Like, I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not opposed to the effort. My curiosity, and that's all it is why now? Why then?
I think it's who's in the presidency.
I agree. So who? Yeah. Who has Pete? Yeah.
He has a Christian advisor to campaign on the Christian vote. There's a huge populace of Christians that are backing President Trump, and they're in his ear. And he had to say something. That's my 2 cents. And he did it, and he has no intention of doing anything else other than trying to appease the Christians.
It's just odd.
It is.
He's in the office for the second term. There's no third term. You don't need, and he has demonstrated, the administration has demonstrated at every turn, they don't care about public perception. They don't care about anyone's support. You don't want to get in line with the president? Okay, that's fine. He'll do it unilaterally. He'll fire you and find somebody else. So why appease or capitulate any group, any lobbyist, any one? Why? There's no third term here. I don't get it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people that think otherwise. Bannon for one.
Stop. I'm not getting into that one. That's ridiculous.
But I do think, money is king, and when money, you can't just, you don't look at what's going on in this one. You don't blatantly ignore the APAC, you don't blatantly ignore who's spending money just because there is no third term. I do think that it is a check the box situation.
I mean, maybe he may be just feeling generous and decide to throw a bone to his base, but Trump has never once demonstrated he is beholden to anyone. He doesn't care what popular opinion is. He doesn't care what his advisors say. The only reason he does something is because he wants to do it, not because he feels obligated. And this is why I'm wondering what is going on, because this persecution could have been handled any time over the last 10 years. Like, why now? I don't. And again, noble, I think it's worthwhile just doing. It's odd to me in light of everything else that's going on the planet that this is suddenly a focus of effort.
Yeah. I mean, it is fascinating for sure. We could pontificate about it.
The other story that I'm interested in sharing is the change in footprint in Syria and the warning that Pete Hegseth gave the Iraqi government about possible proxy retaliation against the United States in Syria. So if we go back to September, there was a very senior ISIS commander who was killed in a CENTCOM targeted strike, probably Special Operations Forces in conjunction with a lot of ground intelligence from our good friends in the agency. That was central because this individual had threatened and was credibly threatening attacks directly on the U.S. homeland. So while we may have moved on to other things, there's an entire part of the United States government that is still very much in charge of tracking down and eliminating terrorists that could potentially cause attacks here at home. I'm all for it. All of it. So the more you can kill overseas, the less that we have to worry about here. Along that same vein, ISIS in Syria continues to be a problem. And what the United States has done, and very cleverly, may I add, is negotiate a ceasefire potential ceasefire with Israel and Syria. Now, Sana'a denies this, Damascus denies this, but what the United States would like to do is help broker a peace deal that would allow for the southern portion of Syria to basically be a demilitarized zone. And in order to oversee that peace deal with Israel and Syria, well, the U.S. is going to send a contingent to a Damascus air base. What a lovely opportunity that is to use that air base as a staging ground to continue counter-terrorism operations against ISIS and a whole host of other groups that are operating in that area. Now, Israel and Syria have a long and contentious relationship. Israel launched airstrikes into Syria throughout the past couple of years while the conflict with al-Assad was taking place, and it continues in limited strikes currently. But a while back, the U.S. did ask the Israelis, hey, hold off on these strikes while we broker this arrangement with Damascus. Now, Damascus is denying the entire thing publicly, loudly, but assets are moving, so they can deny it all that they want, but there is going to be a presence ostensibly to help broker this peace arrangement, to oversee the establishment of a demilitarized zone in the southern portion of Damascus. But the second and third order effect is the United States gets to use that area as a staging ground for strikes, continued strikes, especially on the heels of a successful hit against a known terrorist. So they got that going for them. In conjunction with the establishment of this base, a very stern phone call was made to the Iraqi government, telling them, listen, do not retaliate for anything that the United States does. And I don't mean the Iraqis. It is Iran-backed insurgents staged in Iraq. They've been there since the 2003 invasion. They were probably there during the Iran-Iraq war, but there is a contingent of Iran-aligned militias in Baghdad, in Iraq, and if they have an opportunity, it kind of puts us in a Horn's dilemma. If they strike against the United States for whatever reason, then we, in turn, are obligated to strike them. And this tit-for-tat escalation continues until one party or both decides that, okay, that's it. It's kind of like when you and your brother hit each other in the shoulder and whoever can hit harder wins. Nobody wants to be the guy that admits that they can't take any more hits, but it's kind of the way that it goes. So the United States gave a firm call to the Iraqi government, lasted about 11 minutes. It was publicly announced on both sides that the call was made by Pete Hegseth, that it was ostensibly your final warning to the Iraqis that they need to take better ownership of their security. They need to tighten down on some of these insurgents groups, or at the very least, keep them the fuck out of our business in Syria, because what we have taking place over here is extremely important. So what's driving this ramp up is, as I mentioned, this potential Israeli and Syrian security pact that would allow both parties to sort of de-escalate on the military and the kinetic strikes and to work towards a joint security cooperation. It would also, as I said, demilitarize the certain portion of the country, which would allow that zone in southern Syria to be a safe haven. That works towards a greater regional peace. So it also does a couple of other things to our friends, the Iranians, the Russians, and to a little lesser extent the Chinese, is that it keeps them out. Anytime we leave a place, one of those two big people come in, either China or Russia or both. And there's a whole host of proxies that they have. And then there's a whole host of like little fleas that jump on the big dogs and ride them in as well. So if we can establish operations at least on a small footprint in Damascus, it's going to prevent Russia, it's going to prevent Iran from coming in there and occupying ground in our stead. So that's a helpful thing. If you didn't know, we have about 230, 300 military advisors currently still in Iraq, which is enough considering where Iraq is in this point in its history and our involvement in it. Most of those forces are used to advise and coordinate with U.S. forces in Syria amid a renewed ISIS concern. So it's important that we maintain stability and the status quo in Iraq, which I think was what precipitated Hegseth's call and is in conjunction with our forces moving into Damascus. It helps explain the sharper U.S. warnings, keeping militias out of it, which, again, we don't want to go tit for tat. We're also realigning our footprint. At one point, we had as many as 8 bases in Syria and Sana'a, and we have looking to consolidate those into basically one single location. It would allow for better command and control, not have our forces as decentralized as they have been. It's logistically, it's a lot cleaner, and it allows us to do a better coordination. It also allows for Israel and Syria to potentially, as I said earlier, come up with a peace framework, or at least something that agrees that they recognize one another's sovereignty, which would go a long way towards stability in that region, especially in light of all of the kinetic strikes that Israel is currently making. I don't know if you've been following the news, but there was a strike recently in Lebanon and the southern portion, and Israel continues to look towards that area of the country as a hotbed of insurgent activity towards the Israelis. It's interesting that they're taking that tack, the Israelis. They're basically fighting a four-front war in many ways between a whole host of adversaries, both adjacent borders and beyond. I give them credit for at least managing this, because it certainly has to be a nightmare, but they seem to be doing it. I don't know how much longer they can keep it up, but it is taking place. Iraq advisor numbers, those, as mentioned, are going to be restricted towards coordinating operations in Damascus, and all of this really just goes towards our continued effort eliminating ISIS, targeting counterinsurgency in those countries, but keeping those forces there and fixed instead of dealing with them on the homeland soil it's a good thing. Ardbeg, by the way, tenure, it's quite lovely. Petey, you'd like it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really comes down to, I mean, it's basically 3 things. I mean, you've got after researching it, it's ISIS, it's Israel, and to me, it's Russia, because Russia's history in Syria and like not allowing the opportunities for Russia or the insurgent groups such as ISIS to gain any kind of foothold. And then, we're always up Israel's ass. So, that's definitely a relevant part of it.
So what to look for in the next couple of weeks regarding our establishment in Syria? There's going to be continued CENTCOM briefings and releases on activity that takes place. According to the press pool that's there, we will see how rapidly and elegantly that is disseminated. Of course, we've talked about the the Pentagon's press pool, and this is an example of the new paradigm. We'll see how well that information is disseminated and to what degree. Look for the drawdown of forces in Syria to consolidated locations. Look for formal confirmations and details about peace deals and timelines. And we'll continue to follow the story and update you if anything new develops. And until then, once again, happy birthday to the U.S. Marine Corps, 250 glorious years to the finest fighting force the world has ever seen. As always, I'm the Iceman, Brad Colbert. Stay frosty. Won't you stay for some toasted cheese sandwiches?
You gotta look into the camera when you do that.
No, because you're going to put it out there.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.